what's up, guys? It's your host, Wes Soller, for Conservatism on Tap, and I'm pouring myself a beer right now. And I am honored to be joined by my brother, John. Hey, John, good to see you. Cheers.
Good to see you too, Wes.
And then always a pleasure to be joined as well by Josh Lewis of the Saving Elephants podcast. Good to see you, Josh.
Always good to be here, Wes.
So I have missed you guys immensely over the past couple of weeks. I know that we had some appointments and things we were going to do together. I know I'm sure I've missed several phone calls from you, John, but it is great to be back and to see y'all. How was your 4th of July? Let's just start with that. So, John, how was yours?
It was really good. The girls ended up holding a lot of sparklers, and so because it's they don't really do a whole lot,
Right.
right here in Virginia in regards to a whole lot of shows, but especially with things still opening back up and whatnot. But Ellie and Addie were able to hold sparklers pretty much the entire night. I just kept feeding it to them, like just lighting it up. And then before long, we had a lot of kids in the neighborhood come around. But we had dozens and dozens of sparklers going off. So it was very age appropriate for them. It was good. No burns. So it all worked out.
Yeah, so you were able to get away with that in liberal Virginia up there. I wasn't sure what they do and don't allow.
Yeah.
So,
It's like the fireworks gets like, I don't know, they go lower and lower every year until like they just don't go anywhere. So you got to really go down to Tennessee or South Carolina or things like that to get the mortars that shoot way up in the air.
I'm loading up what we did, so you have to give me a second on that one because we had a friend of mine, here it is, and he went up to Alabama, which is even more liberal, dare I say. But by liberal, I, of course, mean conservative and explosive in the fireworks that he brought. And there you go. That's what we had right there. That gentleman is over $900 of fireworks. And so when you ask me what's allowed in Florida,
That's awesome.
That. So we had you shot those off of a pier and everything, and
tell me that your kids helped shoot those off.
They had like at one point they had sparkling swords. So they had swords that were sparklers on the ends of it, and we had this system because our only problem, and this is the most 21st century American problem I can think of. In the conservative South, is how do we launch all of these fireworks without it going until 2 a.m. because people got to sleep at some point. And so we had a system of like 6 guys where we would all give ourselves 3 seconds to light and then run, and 3 or 4 would go off at once, and we just make fun of the person who didn't get theirs lit, right? So it was a blast. It was a lot of fun. So, and how about you, Josh? How was 4th of July for you, brother?
Unfortunately, the liberality of the state of Oklahoma, where it's probably legal for us to just go out in our backyard and shoot AK-47s in the air all night,
right?
Unfortunately, it's very lost on me. Maybe because I'm a CPA, I probably wouldn't ever buy $900 worth. What was that? 900? You said 900 worth of fireworks?
So he builds it up every year because he never gets to a point where he launches them all. So this is a friend of mine down the street. So he's just kind of building each year, but I'm sure he threw down
Oh, that's cool.
There was probably 20, 25 of us.
Well, whatever it is,
but yes, it was a lot.
I mean, I like watching fireworks as much as the next guy, but I think I'd find it easier just to get a wad of 20s worth, $900 worth, and light those on fire.
Right. Yeah. Well, he's gotten very specific about it. My favorite one, I think there was 100 different fireworks within the little system, and they just kept going, right? There's just one after another, so it lasted for 5 minutes straight. But it was a lot of fun. So,
there's always this need that if you get too deep into fireworks, you end up having to feel the need to create your own firing system. Just putting it on the ground and lighting the fuse becomes old hat. You're whatever.
No, my guy had on his pier, he had tubes, right? And you would slant them, right? So, you could just put in the Roman candles or whatever into the tubes and then light it on the back end, and then it would do it. So that was like a sideshow compared to what was going on the dock. So awesome. It was a lot of fun. So they know how to do it right down here, I'm telling you. Speaking of doing it right, I'm just drinking here a little Indicator, again, very Floridian. Put that in front of the camera. But Jonathan, you got something else to showcase to us tonight. What you got?
Yeah, this is from 3 Notch. So this is called the Minuteman IPA, brewed in Charlottesville. But I honestly was not much of an IPA person for the longest time. I stayed staunchly like bourbon barrel was my thing.
Yeah,
Lately, bourbon barrels have gone downhill in this area of Virginia. I'm not sure why. They just taste a little bit more artificial. Maybe it's just an old timer here about it. Now it's like, 5 years ago, that was the actual bourbon.
right.
So I've gone over to the IPAs, and it's a good orange flavor, but it's extremely good during the summer when it's
That's
hot.
interesting. Yeah, much like you. Like I'll try an IPA once in a while, but it's not typically my flavor. More of a Hefeweizen type guy, or if it's in the winter, I'll go with the stouts and the porters. But that looks pretty dang good right there, especially coming from Charlottesville, a place that
Yeah,
I love. So that's awesome. Thanks for that. We'll definitely have to try.
absolutely.
So, and then transitioning into our toast and roast. Now that we got our beer to toast with, this one is going to be interesting for you guys because after 4th of July, coming off a high, my kids had a great time and all that stuff. This past week has been extremely difficult for our family and for me personally. It's definitely been a struggle that I didn't see coming because my son got diagnosed with what is called adenovirus, and I don't think are either of you familiar with this.
I'm not.
Yeah, I was not either, but
I
I'm
never
going
heard
to
of it.
roast the heck out of it tonight. Not a fan because adenovirus, it's really just a name for a collection of different types of viruses, but we've been through quite a few different diseases and things. But my son evidently caught this a few days ago, and then it sent his fever through the roof, right? He got like 105, 106, and so we had a trip to the ER. It was very uncomfortable, not fun at all, and he's been fighting that off for the past 3 days. When you think about going back out and, everybody's going back to school, my kids had vacation Bible school with 500 other kids. You expect some diseases and things like that to get floating around, cold, flu, that type of thing. But this was on another level for him, especially because he's so young and 3 years old. And it's just amazing how something like that can really bring you to your knees. Because much like you, I didn't know what that meant. Adenovirus, like why is his temperature so high? Is he going to be okay? Are we talking permanent
Yeah.
damage? All of those type of things. It's like Christopher's watching online and he said, great to hear he's doing better. And he is doing better. So I'm going to roast the hell out of adenovirus. But I am thankful for urgent care and ERs and first responders and all those wonderful folks. We actually have one that's less than a mile from our house. And so I threw him in the car and we were
Right,
there
yeah.
within a few seconds, and of course they knew exactly what to do and how to treat him, and got him what he needed, tested him for COVID, tested him for RSV and the flu and everything, and ultimately within a day a pediatrician was like, "Yep, adenovirus, that's what he's got," and he's been recovering. That's a picture of him. I finally got to take him out of the house after several days of recovery. Got him some snow cones down the street. So toasting those
Yeah.
folks because and I guess that's kind of the point of it tonight is it's amazing how everything can be fine and you're shooting fireworks and you're celebrating freedom and trying new beers like Jonathan showed us, and then within a minute your humanity and meekness and smallness and fragility is made very apparent to you, and that's how I felt for the past week, you guys.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of our toast and roast for today. But it got me thinking about Burke and conservatism and its place. And something, Josh, that we talk about a lot is trying to recover that true sense of what conservatism is versus what it's become in the partisan, space. And so much of that is Burke and philosophers like him. And so when we look at what are we reading, I've been reading several things when I get some time, especially being at home watching my kid. One of them that came to mind immediately was this book that I feel like we could talk about for a few minutes here with what we've got left in the show, which is the Sublime and the Beautiful. And I'm sure Jonathan knows where I'm going with it. But John, if you wanted to talk about this for a second, because I know you read it before I did. I had been reading most of Burke's work, and this is one of the last ones that I read. But having
Yeah.
read it a couple times now, it's one of my favorites.
Yeah, it's a short work. Certainly a lot less intimidating than his reflections on the revolution in France. And actually, this was the work that I went to because I actually went off from reflections. I didn't really feel like I was in the know of Burke's mind, so I wanted to hop on over to something that actually related to me at the time because I was reading things like Milton's Paradise Lost, was an English major in college, and those works really interested me. Homer's Iliad, all the epics and stuff. And then so jumped over here, started reading it out. And what was interesting over here is Burke really pinpoints that area of life that let's just say if you've ever like looked under the stars at night when there's absolutely no lights about, like you're camping, and you look up at the sky and you actually start seeing like wow, look how many stars there actually are. And if you ever have this feeling that you feel so insignificant or you feel so small, you start actually trying to comprehend how far all those stars are away, and actually like those stars, you're looking at light that was emitted millions of years ago, even though it's traveling at the speed of light. Those kind of things that make you feel small in life, all that wonder and astonishment of the unknown, is what Burke is really hitting at here in this work. And this work is what jump started a lot of romanticism later on in the next century, even over to America. But you had like things like Mary Shelley's Frankenstein that was inspired by this.
Yep.
You have Wordsworth and Coleridge, like the Rime of the Ancient Mariner, definitely inspired by this work. But whenever you feel like this sense of insignificance, but it's not unhealthy, it's not Lovecraftian unhealthy, that leads you to something like insanity or some disorder, but it's something that gives you a new appreciation for where you're at in your life. That is the sublime. It's very akin to terror. But I really like Burke's work on this. It helped me find my place in appreciating Burke. And then I was able to jump over to some of his more political heavy treatises and start relating that as well.
Yeah, and it's I miss that. I miss that about conservatives. And Josh, you've had the chance to interview all kinds of amazing conservatives with your podcast and all that. I miss the notion of conservatives as questioners, as deep thinkers, as curious. It seems so much of conservatism today is about beating the left and arguing the left and defending what we know is right. And I think that's very important, but to me, it's also important to make advances in how we think about life, or to pose new questions or to return to old questions in different ways. And it seems like we've taken our eye off the ball. Is that kind of your experience talking to so many folks in relation to the conservative movement today?
Boy, that's a leading question. Yes, absolutely. No, and I love it, but it's my friend Avi Wolf talks about this in comparison to like fights for freedom of speech rights or to remove speech restrictions on college campuses that he often talks about on the right. This is a good and a noble fight, but the problem is what happens if the right gets its way completely. Like at some point you have to stop talking about I need the right to speak, and you have to have something worth saying. If we give everyone the right to speak, well, what is it we're trying to say? And I think that is an element of conservatism that's missing, as you say, the curiosity, the beauty, I think too of one of the other greatest conservative minds who unfortunately we lost last year, the philosopher Sir Roger Scruton.
Yep.
He by profession was not only a philosopher, but specifically studied aesthetics and beauty. And it's interesting. I think he and Burke were very much of a like mind about this, the importance of beauty and how it helps us see our place in the universe, and how it's very fleeting, how unfortunately, because of the world we live in, that we inhabit, we have to exert additional efforts than maybe our ancestors would have in order to experience these things that are very healthy for the soul and the mind.
Right.
Yeah.
So much of conservatism, I think, has become pure reactionary, right? To what the left is doing. We'll sort out the principles later. I had a professor named Jim Caesar in Charlottesville, where they also make great beer, as Jonathan said. And he said if conservatives ever had their way, as you suggest, Josh, that they would immediately turn on each other and start trying to argue about who's the true conservative, right? And they would immediately start fighting libertarians and neocons and everything else, because it's about that, as opposed to the sublime and the beautiful and all those things.
We kind of do that now.
Sure, yeah, we absolutely do. I mean, that term rhino is constantly thrown around, and it's fascinating to me how that tends, what does that mean, right? Like, because it just anybody besides you, anyone who thinks differently, it's almost become against any type of not just diversity, but any type of discussion. you know, um,
Yeah.
how different is that than where Burke was exploring, even on his own, and trying to sort out what he himself believed and wasn't sure. So
Hmm.
this is it. So this is the book. As Jonathan said, it's very small. So it's only about 60 pages. I'm looking at, yeah, 60 pages, and I just want to read from it when you talk about that notion of the sublime, Jonathan, because it's very central to his thought and makes a lot of things make sense. So just a couple of very small excerpts here. He says the sublime, that is, it is productive of the strongest emotion which the mind is capable of feeling. And he goes on to talk about pain versus pleasure, very much the way that C.S. Lewis would do years later. But he goes beyond that to actually define sublime as something beyond emotion and speaks to something even greater. He says it's a sort of delightful horror, a sort of tranquility tinged with terror, which, as it belongs to self preservation, is one of the strongest of all the passions. Its object is the sublime. So the sublime is not the emotion itself, it's what causes that. Its highest degree I call astonishment. The subordinate degrees are awe, reverence, and respect, which by the very etymology of the word show from what source they are derived and how they stand distinguished from positive pleasure. So this is
Hmm.
amazing, right? Like in Burke's time to be talking about something like this when naturalism seemingly was reigning, right? There was this Rousseau and everything else that just celebrated nature as it is. There was Descartes who celebrated, the mind and our self assurance. Darwin, all those things were coming to be able to really defend naturalism. And here Burke is talking about something that is clearly beyond nature that leads us to some type of experience that we can't fully explain. And even
Right.
our awe and our astonishment is subordinate to it. So what do you guys make of that?
I'm thinking
Yeah.
of the. Oh, I'm sorry, John. Go ahead.
No, you go for it, Josh. It's all you. I'm just going to drink.
I guess this is sort of the British thinker hour between Burke and Scruton, and you'd mentioned C.S. Lewis. The other name I thought of was G.K. Chesterton,
Absolutely.
and kind of the manifestation of this natural impulse or way of thinking that if you take it out to its logical conclusions, that you end up with a man who is insane. He uses this example of the person who thinks he's the king of England, and we all know he's insane. But there is no argument you can give this guy to convince him he's not the king of England. However, he talks about another path at reaching someone is not just pure argument. It's, boy, wouldn't life be easier if you weren't the king of England? And it's kind of expanding your imagination or your scope outward to where you see yourself as appropriately small, not insignificant in the sense that we want to have a certain pride of character and a pride of how we conduct ourselves, but we also don't want to be so piggish about it that we're unable to recognize the humility of who we are as human beings.
Yeah.
But that in that humility there actually is joy, and we get to experience life in a healthier way. Anyhow, I guess that was my raw thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely, John.
I mean, I have a lot of thoughts just because the work is so close, to me and what I've experienced in my own life. I think what's fascinating is, kind of what we've hinted at before. People get so fixated on their lives now, whether that is their political views, whether that is just, life in quarantine, and because of COVID, you just honestly, all you could do is just optimize your domestic affairs. And that's pretty much it because, you were quarantined away for over like a year and a half. I mean, people get fixated. People get fixated on their life right here. And the sublime, like, just barrels right through that, right? It's a big wrecking ball that just breaks down the walls of your mind. And it's not a comfortable experience for the most part, and just as it is for anyone who feels like their worldview is being challenged, because most of the time people have this fixed worldview that they want. And if you open that up, it's something that makes them feel vulnerable. And that's exactly where the sublime wants you to be.
Yeah.
What's fascinating is where authors took that later on is that, like, the romanticists, right? You've got Herman Melville, you've got Henry David Thoreau, and like nature was both a comfort. It was like it was that carrier of the sublime, like you were talking about, Wes, that almost flew in the face of rationality. It ignited the passions. And yet it was also the healer. It was the thing that came in to play and said, you know what, though, like this creation was for you. It's okay. And it dusts you off, right? When Frankenstein is haunted by the monster he created, which is like this sublime terror, he goes and retreats to the mountains where he feels like there's healing for him, and that's because of he's surrounded by nature and something that's natural. I don't know. I mean, I think that one of my favorite works too is Moby Dick, and because of it's mainly because Moby Dick represents that sublime nature that it can't be conquered, it can't be fully understood, and yet all throughout the book, they're hunting whales, they're dissecting whales. There's chapters that you wonder, like, why am I reading like this science textbook chapter on like why Herman Melville is like dissecting all these whales and showing us their parts? And I think he's trying to make this message that just because you understand something, just because you understand what a star is made out of, and you can, classify its core components and see exactly how far away it is, like there's still something sublime that can't be fixed by rationality, by just science alone, by hard materialist fact. There is this other, this force that makes you feel small, and yet it should be almost like a Jobian comfort, right? But it's just really, really amazing, in my opinion. And I know, obviously, I'm ranting about just where the sublime has been taken throughout literature and where it could take us if we just look up.
Yeah,
right.
That's a huge part of it. You made me think of like cosmology and how the leading quantum, mechanics theorists and all that talk about dimensions that we can't yet access, but that we believe exist based upon the theorems and formulas, etc. And I think that's a part of it. But the one other thinker that I would want to include in this is St. Augustine, because, and not a British guy at all, like going way back when. But I think that in his Confessions, he talks about his experience with God, and he talks about trying to describe it to people. And he says, think of the most delicious thing that you've tasted. This was better. Think of the most beautiful thing you've seen. Well, this was more beautiful. Think of, the sweetest sound you've ever heard. Well, this was sweeter. And you see people in the Bible trying to describe their experience with God, and they have the same type of difficulty trying to attach, words and adjectives to their experience. And I think that's what Burke is describing, is something that goes beyond. Russell Kirk talked about it, and he talked about the elative sense, is that you have a sense in your spirit that is able to perceive things beyond the hard sciences, beyond the physical senses. And when that is awakened, your imagination and your entire spirit takes flight. But it's also terrifying because you're not in control of it. And I guess that's what I felt. That's what I felt when, my son was sick and I was sitting there in the ER and hoping that he was okay, as I realized how utterly powerless I was. And I know this in my head, and I know this in my faith system, in my belief in my spirituality. But to be reminded, because guys, 1 minute, like I was fixing dinner and going about my day and thinking about what I was doing tomorrow, and the next minute I was there, right? Like I was utterly like powerless and humbled and at the mercy of a force far greater than myself. And thank God it wasn't just the adenovirus.
Right.
So that's what he's talking about. And it's just wonderful that, in our channel, we kind of celebrate Burke, and he was far more than just, a right-wing reactionary, right? He was also a thinker who put into words something that ultimately is impossible to describe. And I just found it so beautiful. And
it makes me want to say, first off, Wes, we should actually toast you for responding so quickly to get your son to the ER, by the way.
It happens, as a parent, you talk about like opening up a whole new field of thought and experience. Like, I'm still fighting them, apparently.
I mean, being a dad is extremely rewarding, but it does come with those terrors every now and again where you have to feel like, okay, my day could like turn at the drop of a hat because a kid, I don't know, me and dad were changing out like my fencing, and like a kid can just step on a nail and all of a sudden like, okay, well, work is over. Got to figure out how to handle all this. But yeah, I think that the Sublime just is displacing. This is also why everybody needs therapy. Everybody should go to a therapist at some point in their life, because hopefully you've been displaced at some point in your life, and that has caused you to reevaluate things and makes you want to find new placement, new sense making, new meaning. Does what I do actually matter? Right? Is what I'm doing matter? Actually meaningful? The Sublime will challenge that. It certainly will, and hopefully everybody experiences it. But how people respond to that is up to them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What and kind of I'll let Josh. I'll let you have the last word on this. But kind of what I was going with in terms of the people that you interview and the conservatism that I know that you articulate on your channel is something that we want to do here, and Cal and so many others that we know is a conservatism that is on the move and not just against the left, but that is on the move to be able to articulate, identify with these beautiful things in life. And I remember seeing that. I remember seeing that not often, but at times from Bush, and as he would take moments to reflect and talk about things greater than just the issues of the day. Maybe not enough, but certainly there were times that he did that. I think about Reagan doing that. I mean, some of his most famous speeches are bringing in deeper principles. Obviously, there was other leaders like Buckley and so many other conservatives. Russell Kirk certainly did that. But I would love to see a conservatism that isn't just angry at reality, but is also in love with the beautiful things that lie beneath it, even if they humble us. And I appreciate what you do, because you bring in so many people, in your work that do that as well.
Oh, I appreciate that, Wes, and I'm right there with you. I think a theme, if you will, of a lot of our conversations on conservatism on tap is discomfort, or kind of this, wrestling with discomfort. It's okay to have your worldview upset. It's okay to feel sublime and your world kind of altered. Obviously, we can't be that way all the time. We have to be somewhat settled. But I firmly believe that conservatism is a worldview that, properly understood, actually is not for the faint of heart. It takes a very mature person. It takes a person who has an immense amount of gratitude, who understands how not just to be angry about the things that need torn down, but very much knows how to appreciate and recognize and have that wisdom for the slow accretion of very painstaking work that takes place, and a lot of selflessness. We have to be willing to build things. What is the old phrase? To plant trees that we're not going to get to enjoy their shade.
Right.
That is the heart of conservatism, I think, and it's not for everyone, but it is a fight worth fighting.
Yeah. And I think what we've got to do is we've got to figure out ways to articulate that and to move into the public space with it, because people that don't believe that, people that believe that conservatism is very obvious, it's just right wingism, it's just it's freedom and that's it, right? Like it's just anti-left and that's it. Are not going to give up the mantle of conservatism on their own, because it's so profitable. There's if you are angry and you hate liberals, there's a big market, and a lot of money to be made in trying to stoke those flames. And I think the challenge for us is to be able to move forward and actually recover that space that Buckley once had, right? That so many other, Roger Scruton, right? Like he's not coming back. We've got to figure out how to build, the next movement that brings conservatism, thoughtful conservatism, to the forefront and not on the edges where it seems to be so often. So thankful for you guys for doing that. Thanks for indulging my nerddom, but hopefully it relates to life. It certainly did for me, and it's one of those things that shows just how important some of these books are when you're at a tough spot, and all of a sudden they pop into your brain and give you a sense of comfort. That was my case. So thank you guys so much. For those that are watching live, or if you're watching this the day after, don't forget to check out our website, thebreakingconservative.com, our YouTube channel, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. We're on all those. If you've got topics you want us to dive into, if you relate to this, let us know, and we'll be happy to talk about whatever you like. So thank you guys. Thank you, Josh Lewis. Don't forget to check out his podcast too, Saving Elephants. And John, always a pleasure to have you on. Thanks for being here, brother.
Cheers, man.
Next week.
Cheers, Josh.